Hello, welcome back to the podcast Journey to Well. So I was just telling Dr. Diane, I'm like, I am so excited to talk to you. I've been telling all of my friends that this is my favorite topic to talk about. This is my favorite topic to approach because we don't talk about sex enough. And I've had a sex therapist on the podcast before, which if you haven't listened to that, go listen to Emma. But you are, Dr. Diane is a board certified sexologist with dual doctorates in naturopathic medicine and acupuncture and Oriental medicine. And we are here to talk about your book that's coming out, probably already out by the time this podcast airs. And we are here to talk about the conversation of sex and open that up. And one of the things I really love about you is that you really love to talk about sustainable monogamous relationships, which I think when we talk about sex, oftentimes it ends up being like maybe exploring like polygamy or different things. So I really love the flavor of your what lights you up in your business. But before we get to all of that good stuff, let's do a little introduction. Let's hear a little bit of you and what brought you into this field, especially with your double doctorate that has nothing seemingly to do with sex. Thank you so much for coming on. And yeah, I will hand the reins over to you to introduce yourself however you would like.
Thank you. I will introduce myself with a couple quick stories here. And the
Mm.
first one is how I got interested in sex. And the second one is how I decided to talk about this publicly, because these are two very different things. So
Okay.
it was really interesting. I first got interested in the topic of sex long before I even was in medical school, or years, I should say, before I was in medical school, when I was about 20 years old. And I was having this really crazy vulvar pain, and it was like keeping me up at night. It was really impacting my health. And like I said, this was before I went to medical school, so I didn't know anything about medicine. I went to doctors, ran tests, everything was normal, but it was just like, well, what is driving me kind of batty with this pain? And one day I started talking to my roommate at the time, and she handed me a book that shocked me because I had a very, very religious upbringing, and it like self pleasure was taught to me as like very, very bad and wrong. So she handed me this book called Sex for One by Betty Dodson. And it was shocking to me, right? Because this was like something that I would never consider doing. But one night I'm reading this in my vulvar pain. And in the book, Betty talks about how she was finding that people, when they self pleasured, when they masturbated, the pain was going away.
Mm.
So one desperate evening, I tried it for the first time ever. And oh my God, Hannah, like the pain totally went away. Came back the next night, tried it again, pain went away. And so I did this a few nights in a row. And then the pain was just totally gone, never came back.
Wow.
And so that was definitely like the first thing that really opened me up to something that I say a lot through my book, which is pleasure is not just about desire, but something that we require, because it really opened up the question for me of why are we given this gift of pleasure? Why do we have a clitoris as women that literally has zero purpose other than pleasure? So my study, my work, all of that with it was all has just been for two and almost 2.5 decades behind closed doors. Um, just being like, okay, this is just like my hobby of what I'm reading about for fun in my own life and to help me with my relationship, that sort of thing. But a few years ago, when I went through a divorce and really went through the trauma of that, and that was like just after that, the Harvard study came out, and the Harvard study showed it was an 85-year-long study. And it looked at water and exercise and food and genetics and gut, microbiome, all these different factors, and looked at what was the leading thing that would actually not just lead to better, like to happier lives or to longer lives, but to happier, better lives. Out of everything they looked at over 85 years, the evidence was conclusive. And the answer was relationships.
Mm.
And really having been fueled by divorce and really wanting to make a difference and help people prevent against that, and knowing the importance of relationships, and knowing that lack of intimacy is one of the top 5 reasons why couples get divorced. that really is what started me on my mission. And the mission now is to improve 1 million relationships. So that's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here talking to you. That's why I wrote my Want It book. And, and that's really why I do the work I do, is to just help couples have more passion in their lives. And, with my medical background, it's like really prime me to, be in research and to understand like what is the science, and look at like the science behind desire and the science behind libido, and say, okay, how can we do this from like a very tactile and pleasure filled thing, way, because it is about pleasure, but how can we actually also look and like, kind of hack sex, so to speak, from a scientific way as well?
Interesting conversation topic. And I love one of the things that we kind of talked about when we first chatted was this desire mismatch and exploring that. And I'm curious if you can kind of expound upon that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a really important, conversation, which is why it came up last time we chatted, because it's one of the number one things that will actually drive couples to have problems with their intimacy life. It's one couple is way more interested, or one partner is way more interested in the other partner.
Mm,
And sometimes it's the one, sometimes the other. It can flip throughout lifetime. And the way couples are often, try to navigate this is something like, well, okay, well, I want it, every day, or I want it every week, and you want it 3 times a year. So we're going to meet in the middle and have it like once a month. And what winds up happening when couples try to do that is like one partner is always having like, or most of the time having like obligatory sex,
yeah.
just like having it because they're trying to like, feed the relationship and do that. And the other person is also like not getting their needs met. So it's like, while I do very much agree with people when they say that like compromise is a very important skill to have in relationships, when it comes to the way that's applied to desire mismatch, oftentimes it really leaves this kind of problem with, with what I'm sharing here.
Yeah.
So there's lots to be said here, but one of the first things that really helps couples, and like I have a 6 week course on this, and the first step that I oftentimes give people is that helps kind of with like that motivation to even take a further step, is to do this, is to actually write out a values list of the top things that you value the most in your life. And any relationship expert will say that, right at the top should be you, your partner, and any sort of spiritual, God, energy, universe, any sort of spiritual thing that you believe in. And those are the three that should be at the top. And then children and work and all those other things should
Yeah.
fall right under that. Right. And so write out your values list and then make a pie chart. And in the pie chart, put 24 pieces of pie representing the 24 hours a day. And
Okay.
hopefully 7 to 9 of them are sleeping. And then what you're doing is you're filling in the rest of the pie with what you're doing. And you're looking to see, first of all, if your partner even has a piece of the pie. So before we even get into fixing the desire, before we even do that, and there's a lot we can do there, but the first fundamental step is saying, like, kind of like that awareness of like, Houston, we've got a problem kind of thing, right? Like that awareness of, do I even have, and am I even creating space for my partner to exist in life? And what I see is like, just like with our Fitbits, just like, these data tracking devices, there's even a great data tracking device for orgasms, that, okay, and that makes this data tracking device is really cool. And I'm going to circle back to the question here. But this data tracking device is shown, it's a vibrator, and it actually tracks arousal and orgasm. You can see it on an app on your phone. And what they're finding with the research with this is, when we look at it, when we're tracking it, orgasm quality goes up and orgasm frequency goes up. So we're kind of taking that with this initial desire mismatch, like, stuff like that, your Fitbit, your steps, like when we track things, they improve. So it's kind of that first step with saying, okay, I have a problem. I am saying I value this person the most, but yet am I actually allowing them a space into my field? Do they have a space in my day? And that's kind of that initial like, oh, aha. Maybe I don't feel like it, but maybe it is worth putting time learning how to feel like it, learning how to have this intimate time with my partner, because I'm not even giving them space in my day and I'm saying that I value them the most. So that's a good intro step for people.
Yeah, that was my question. So it's kind of reflecting on like how much time you're actually giving them, not how much time that you would wish or would desire to be giving them.
Bingo.
Okay.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's like, it's one of those things, right? Where it's like, and I talk a lot to people about scheduling sex and scheduling intimacy. And it's very, some people love it, but I get a lot of pushback on it because the
Mm-hmm.
biggest level of pushback, the biggest reason is people will say, like, but I just want it to be spontaneous.
Yeah.
And, and there's two things I say to that. And the first is when we are dating in the beginning, when things are hot and we're all in that new relationship energy fire, that we actually always schedule sex. We always schedule our intimacy because we have a date Friday night and maybe it's the first time we might do it. And we're like, okay, well, got to put on the special panties and, the great boxers or whatever they are. And then we're going to see him again in 3 days. And like, are we going to have sex again? Like, okay, like my legs shaved or whatever. Right. So we're constantly actually largely scheduling it and scheduling these dates where it will highly likely happen. And we're kind of planning like that. And then when we combine our lives, we share keys, we move in, buy houses, have kids, all the things, then oftentimes that's actually when we stop scheduling it because it's finally now supposed to be spontaneous when it never was. And then the second thing is, even if you schedule it, if you schedule it like once a week, which is where we see in research that couples say they are the like happiest in their relationship, they tend to have sex on average about once a week.
Okay.
And so, so if we're saying, okay, well, we're going to schedule it once a week so we make sure we get it in, you can still have all the spontaneous sex you want. It's not to say like the one doesn't allow for the other, but it's to say that if this isn't happening regularly, then that is allowing, then you're creating the space for it. Just like, hey, like I know every day when I'm going to get exercise for the day, like that is in my schedule, right? And if it's not in my schedule, it's probably not going to get done. And so it's, kind of a two-part answer is we like the first thing with the pie chart is really about bringing that awareness to people of like, oh my goodness, we have a problem. Like I say, I value you, but yet I'm not actually attending to you, that sort of thing. I'm not attending to us. Right. And then the second phase is, hey, okay, well, here's how I may start making space for this. And that's how we, then start bringing, at least creating the time to work on the desire and the intimacy.
Yeah, and I'm curious because I love defining the differences. I'm curious how you would define the difference between intimacy and sex.
I use intimacy definitely way broadly. I mean, intimacy we
Mm,
can, we can talk about physical intimacy, sexual intimacy, emotional intimacy. We could even throw mental intimacy in there. So I am speaking very broadly about it. And initially, like when we work with things like erotic reprogramming, right? When we're talking about, okay, well, maybe a couple has not had sex in months or even years, oftentimes we will start with more like emotional physical intimacy on kind of our scheduled intimacy nights and not
mm,
even the sexual intimacy yet, and just kind of take that off the table and help couples just like get used to like what is it like to be laying naked giving each other massages without any expectations, right? And just
mm,
kind of building up that safety around that physical and sensual touch. So, I mean, there's definitely a difference. I look at intimacy as like way broader than just sex. Yeah.
mm,
And so whether say a scheduled sex night or a scheduled intimacy night would be, hey, we're more focusing on one area of intimacy versus another, in part is going to be dependent upon like where the couple is. I do really see with what I see in surveys around when couples are reporting to be the happiest in their lives and what we see on like the Harvard study on, longevity in relationships, that from a standpoint of like a good goal to maintain the relationship for most people, I think is really a minimum of once a week as a goal for sex, for true sexual intimacy. But that being said, depending upon where people are, it might not start there. It might start as, hey, let's start our intimacy date nights with just like emotionally connecting and, getting to know each other, feeling safe together. Let's move from there into physical intimacy and work on sensual massage and eventually maybe sensual massage with happy endings. And we kind of build up that intimacy back to sexual intimacy. But to me, the word intimacy is definitely way more broad than just sex. So I appreciate the question.
Mm, yeah, it's such an interesting conversation topic because I've definitely met people that like they kind of just equate intimacy with sex, and having that conversation of there's so many different ways that we can be intimate, and there's so many different forms of intimacy, and almost like inviting that invitation to explore different kinds without, like you said, I think that was really important, without the expectation of sex. Because the other thing that I want to touch on here, and then I do want to get to like my questions that I had reading your book, but the other thing that I want to touch on is that conversation topic of like I'm too stressed out, or I don't feel like, maybe I don't have the desire to have sex. I'm not sure that I've ever really heard the conversation topic of like I don't have the desire to be intimate, or like have like explore intimacy, but like to actually have sex, whether that's coming from the man or the woman. But I would also love to like maybe get your take on how women tend to have more of that or need more of that emotional connection. So, and I know for me, of course, when I'm super busy, like it's just not really the first thing on my mind. Um, and it's been more difficult in the past, like with different partners, if they're not the ones that are kind of to initiate it when I am in a very like stressful season or stretch of my schedule.
Yeah, it's the point that I think is super important to bring up here is there is like what you're saying is so common, right? And it is tends to be more common for women that when women get overwhelmed and stressed and that we like the way estrogen works in the brain is does not allow for the same level of compartmentalization that a testosterone dominant brain has. So it is a lot easier for men largely when they are busy and when they have a long to-do list to be like, okay, to-do list here on the shelf, focus on my beautiful goddess walking across the kitchen that is just so beautiful, and yes, I want to have sex with her. Like
Mhm.
that, not saying that stress doesn't affect them too, it definitely can, and we can see things like erectile dysfunction happen for some men with stress. So it can definitely impact, but that kind of desire of I am interested, stress has tends to have a much less impact more commonly on men than women. And part of the reason for this is very commonly for men, desire happens first before arousal, and for women, arousal happens before desire. So, since you are loving to define things as I do, so let's talk about what I mean by these words.
Yes, please.
So, desire, when we're talking about desire, we're talking about of the mind. We're
Mhm.
talking about arousal, we're talking about of the body. So I'll give you the male example and then I'll give you the female example. So the male example is wow, my babe is walking across the kitchen. She looks so beautiful. Oh, wow. I am kind of turned on. Okay. That's what he's thinking. That's in the mind. That is desire, desires of the mind. And then he has if everything's working correctly, a fast response of his blood to his penile tissue. He gets an erection. Now he's feeling his body. Now he's aroused. So the mind, the desire is happening before the body gets aroused. And so often with like things like desire mismatch, when somebody is overwhelmed, especially when the female is overwhelmed, one of the biggest problems is they and she are oftentimes waiting for the mind to kick on and say, I'm horny, I want you. But even in stressful times, more commonly for the woman, arousal kicks on first. It doesn't always, right? Women have a much more diverse way that they can actually kind of get turned on. But many times for women, the arousal happens first. And so this is like, I'm not in the mood. I have 17,000 things to do on my to do list. Like, I can't even feel my body right now.
Yeah.
Like, are you kidding me? But this is where if he says something like, honey, go lay down, do some breath work. I'm going to do the dishes. Just go lay in bed and just relax. I'm going to come up and I'm just going to give you a massage. And now she's like she's breathing. Now she's getting a massage and it's going on and she's just breathing and relaxing. And then all of a sudden, maybe he strokes his hand and it like goes over her butt. And all of a sudden she might have this feeling of like, or this thought in her mind around like, oh, wow, that actually feels kind of good.
Mm,
So what's happening there is her body is getting aroused, and as her body is feeling the sensations, then the desire kicks on. And this can even go further sometimes for women. Like this has happened to me. I am definitely a productivity woman, so I'm really glad I know this stuff,
yeah.
because what can happen for a woman to even take it further is she starts to have sex and she's like not really that into it, but she's just like, I'm going to show up and do this. And, some minutes are going by. She's still not fully in her body. And then all of a sudden, actually, like she's realizing it like feels good. And that's when she's starting to get aroused. And then towards the end, she might even say something to him like, that was actually really great. Why don't we do that more often? And that's
Mm,
like, because at that end, that desire is that's when that desire is kicking in. So for women, especially when we are stressed out, oftentimes, and again, this is generalization, so there are exceptions, of course, but oftentimes, like if they're going to engage intimately, which actually can really help her with her stress, what she might need is 20, 30, 40 minutes of touch without any penetration, anything like that, to just help her drop into her body and actually let go of all that stuff and feel the sensations of her body, because she is not going to respond as quickly, especially since her desire map is very, very different than his.
Hmm. That I've never actually heard that explained in that way, and that makes so much sense because I do a lot of somatic work in my business and obviously personally as well. And whenever I have consistently, even just a couple minutes a day, tuned into my body, I find that like because pleasure, and I know that I'm sure you have a much more eloquent way to describe it, but um pleasure is not just like the feelings that you have during sex. So anytime that I've had a consistent somatic practice or like a way to drop into my body, I feel that I just feel more pleasure in different waves throughout the whole day. And that really makes sense, even how you just explained that of women have the arousal first and then the desire. I'm curious though, like every time, and this is just me kind of playing devil's advocate, but every time
Oh, good.
I hear somebody say like, oh yeah, it might take like 20, 30, 40 minutes for a woman to get warmed up, as they might call it. Um, I know that I've had conversations with males that are like, "There's no way." Oh, everyone else that I've ever had sex with just like comes in like 5 minutes, or like just comes from like 5 minutes of stimulation, and then I can just stick it in. Or even with females too, like again, going back to when you're feeling really busy, when you're feeling really stressed, like, oh my God, 40 minutes just to get to the place where I might be able to climax. That's a big time commitment. What are some things that you kind of share and exercise through there?
Oh, I'm gonna say something and I might get a rise out of some of your audience members for what I'm gonna say.
Do
So I hope this is okay.
it.
Um, Honestly, so what we see also in sex studies is that only 18 to 30% of women can even orgasm vaginally only.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
So if women are saying they are orgasming in 5 minutes or less, I'm not saying it can't happen, but I am saying a lot of them are probably faking it.
Wow.
And and that's what is I know is going to get some pushback.
Yeah,
But because it is a hard thing for people to wrap their head around. But here's the thing, this is also one of the reasons why so many women stop becoming interested in sex. And I was just
yeah,
interviewing a man on my podcast about this, and from the male perspective, I asked him the same question, and he actually said the same thing that I do, which is that if you're finding that the woman is not as interested in sex and like, why is it going away? It's because you do this enough times and she's actually not getting her needs met and she's not having these amazing orgasms. Like we even see research, like when a woman has really profound orgasms, the oxytocin goes up in her brain, and the oxytocin goes up to a level that the brain actually says, I want more of that. But if
Mm,
she's faking the orgasms and she's not getting that level of oxytocin, she's not going to come back and say, I want more of it, because she's not having her brain change that way. So
yeah.
I'm not, it's like, yes, of course, women can get off with quickies. Of course, that can happen, right? I'm not going to, of course, like say by any means that it doesn't,
Mm,
but we've been too long programmed by movies and porn. And a lot of women wind up faking it because, one, they know their partner will feel like more of a man
yep.
if she gets off. And because we've seen so many movies that say we're supposed to get off in 2 to 5 minutes, that we think that if we don't, oftentimes people think there's something wrong with them and they don't want to admit that. So it's just like, well, okay, well, he's about done. Let's just wrap this up and move on.
Yeah.
And so I really, and I say this in my book too, and with grand apologies, because I know it will, definitely piss people off. But I'm okay with ruffling some feathers because my goal is to help people get closer.
Yeah.
And we have to, it's like, we have to get over this. Hey, there's a 3 to 5 minute goal for this, because the way she's going to come back and want it more and more is if it's like one of the most profound things. And she's like, wow, this changes my life, right?
Yeah.
This is making me a better human. This is making me more resilient. This is making me less stressed out. This is helping me think better. This is building my bones. Like we see that oxytocin for women prevents osteoporosis. It can help build our bones. So there's so many health benefits that she's missing out on by not actually, getting to that point.
Mm.
And so I think it's worth, taking the risk. And I hope, if you get any backlash, you can just direct it to me. 'Cause I don't want it to be on you, but I do think it's just important to mention, because I think there's so many men that are thinking that.
Yeah.
And really, it's doing a disservice not only to women, but it's doing a disservice to them too, because if they want her coming back more and more, the thing to learn is to have, like, our clitoris, for example. Like, this is my clitoris picture. And
Mm.
so for those of you that are listening and not watching, I encourage you to come back and watch the video so you can see this, because we think of it as this little nub, right?
Mm.
Which is just that part that we can see, but it's like a wishbone. So it extends all the way down, like, and runs in our vulva, in part just below our inner labia. And so we're missing, this is like some of the area that will turn a woman on the most.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we're missing it because we're just so excited about intercourse and that penetration. So in order to become a better lover, which is what I'm interested in helping people do, we have to get around this penile, only thing. I mean, that's still great. Penile sex is still great, but it's
Mm.
really a lot broader than that. And the other thing with that is that when it comes to, like, oh, okay, well, how do I have time for this? Which was the other part of your question. That's another reason to schedule it.
I
That's another reason to say, hey, one day a week, I am putting this on my schedule. We're blocking an hour and we are just taking it slow, and we are just
mm.
enjoying each other's bodies, and we are just learning, and we are deeply, I mean, that's really what making love is.
Mm.
And if a man's like, okay, well, how long, how can I last that long, comes up a lot too. Like, how can I last that long? And the average man lasts about 5 minutes long. But there are many techniques, some of which I teach, on how to actually last longer, where it's very, very possible. And I know this sounds crazy to some men, but it's very possible to train your body to last 40 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes. And women can help with that too. Like, we can help our men do that. And so it can last that long. And it's like calculated. There are times where it's like, okay, we're slowing it down, we're breathing, we're taking a break, we're relaxing, right? So we're not just like pushing straight to the finish line. But if we don't schedule it, when it's 10 o'clock at night and we're throwing ourselves in bed, or later, and we got to get out up, and it feels like not that many hours, and we're exhausted from our day, yeah, of course at that point, like, we're not going to have sex like that. Like, it's a lot easier to say, okay, well, it's 10 a.m. Saturday morning, or it's 8 a.m. Saturday morning before kids get out of bed, or 5 o'clock, Friday night, have a babysitter come over, and we're going to spend an hour doing this before we go out, right?
Yeah.
And doing that. And that's the benefit of scheduling it.
Mm, I love that. And just another way to approach that, scheduling feels like not fun or not spontaneous. And I also loved what you said about like we always used to like in the beginning of the relationship, we're actually scheduling sex. I never thought about that perspective either.
Yeah.
So let's get into your book a little bit. So what I did, just so listeners kind of know, because it's going to be maybe a little bit choppy. I don't know. Maybe it'll be very eloquent, but I read your book and I just went through and kind of made some notes that really stood out to me. There's a quote that I want to read eventually. But one of the beginning pieces of your book, you're talking, of course, about monogamy, and you have this really fun term called hot and modern monogamy. So I really want you to touch on that. But my question then was, do you not agree with polygamy then? Like, what are your stances on that? But first, please define what is hot and modern monogamy, because that sounds like
Sure.
a drink that I want to have.
Yeah, I mean, it's if we look at like traditional monogamy and how traditional monogamy is defined. So, from a contrast perspective, traditional monogamy and the way it's talked about historically is all about structure. It's all about
Mm,
stability. It's all about both people having their place and their role so they can come together and basically work together to provide a stable and structured family unit and, division of jobs. If you look back into like when monogamy is talked about historically, it doesn't say anything about passion. It is
mm,
like monogamy and marriage and all of that is really just about how can we raise the kids? How can we both co-work to like, raise the farm, do the house, whatever it was, and have a sustainable life. And that was the purpose of marriage and that was the purpose of monogamy. And so I think there's beauty in that, right? I think there's beauty in, some of these values around, hey, let's work together, let's be teammates, let's, co-create values, let's raise a family of beautiful beings. Like, so the idea of hot and modern monogamy is like, okay, let's take all of that, let's take the good parts, and let's add on to it now talking about keeping the relationship alive. So that looks at your emotional health and the emotional intimacy, that looks at the physical intimacy, and that looks at the sexual intimacy, and really looks at some of the things we're talking about today to say what is actually driving desire and to, keeping that passion alive while we are also making sure that, you're raising kids and doing anything that the couple might decide they want to do.
mm. I do, yeah. So one of the things that I have always said in my relationships, intimate relationships, is I want I want to be the one that is exploring all of your curiosities or desires or whatever you want to fetishes, kinks, whatever you want to call them, but even just like curiosities. And I want you to be able to come to me and feel safe enough to express that desire, because sometimes, again, depending on like the information that we consume, we think it's weird if like we do anything with our feet, or we think it's weird if we do something in the shower, whatever it is. And that's been really important in my relationships, because I do really agree with the idea of like we can co-create this really fun and sexy and hot and modern relationship that when that's I feel my perspective is that when we don't feel that we can communicate with our partner and have those explorations at least considered or curiosities considered, that's one of the things that might lead to cheating. So how do we build that foundation of honest communication? And I'm imagining this hasn't necessarily really happened to me, but I know that this has happened. Like I'm imagining like somebody has this like really maybe quote wild desire, and however you want to explore that in your mind, fill in the blank, and then they come to their partner, right? And like they're either laughed at or judged or like completely shut down. So how do we build that strong foundation of creating that safety around you can really come to me and at least be heard? It doesn't mean that it has to happen, but
Yeah,
at
it's
least.
a really important question, something I talk about in my work, in my book, and I'm gonna go into it in a lot more detail in the first sequel, so part two of the book, which is what I call name it, don't shame it.
Mm,
And so the one of the biggest things I advise people if you're going to share a fantasy is to, before you share it, have the first conversation should be something like, "Hey, I'm going to share something with you about my inner world, my fantasy. And if you're not into it, that's okay. But if you don't like it, here's how I want you to respond." So we actually
mm,
cut that off before it even happens by saying, "Hey, if you don't like what I say, can you respond with something like, babe, I'm not really that interested, but I really love that your fantasy life is like so alive. I don't know if it works for me, but
mm,
can you tell me a little bit more about it?" And you have to make it like agreed upon. It has to, that's an example, and that might not be the example that works for, any specific couple. But as an example, it's like you talk about that ahead of time. So then the person that's listening knows if they're listening from a point of curiosity. They are already given an out. It's very clear
yeah.
that they know, like, hey, I don't have to participate in this. And now they can just listen from a, oh, I'm just learning more about my partner, and this is how I need to respond in order to respect them. So
Mm,
that's usually how we want to do that. I have a yes, no, maybe checklist on my website. I also mentioned it in my book as well. It's at mysexdoc.com, which is a kind of like a fantasy and novelty checklist where people can go through. And it's like kind of a nice intro to these conversations too, to be like, okay, date night, let's do this checklist and let's sit. And like the whole idea of like the yes, no, maybes is to see where you have yeses that are like, wow, you could be into that. So could I.
mm,
And to be, also see like where you have maybes. Because sometimes with certain fantasies, it's like, well, I don't know, but if the parameters were like XYZ, then maybe I would be willing to explore that. And I also want to name that some fantasies really should exist in the fantasy world, right? I think it's a really important thing to realize that some things that seem hot in the mind and might be great for turning people on, when people actually say play them out in real life, it might not actually turn out to be what they think.
mm,
But that's usually the way to do it, is to start with like a name it, don't shame it. Here's how we're going to have this conversation. Here's how you can reply to me if you're not into this. And you negotiate that ahead of time before you even share, the fantasy.
mm. And is this how we, when we're kind of talking about creating sustainable monogamous relationships, is this one of the best ways to extend the longevity of our sex lives is by exploring other things, like to kind of get out of that? Is it like to get out of a rut or to avoid the rut?
Both. It's to expand the sexual script. The way I like to explain it, as I use the analogy of playing a guitar a lot, where it's like, okay, if somebody's learning guitar and they learn a D chord for the first time and they have it strumming just right where the chords sound beautiful and it's really exciting. You can start a different strumming pattern and it feels like, wow, I'm doing something. And then you throw in a G chord and then you throw in a C, and now you have three basic chords that a lot of songs are based upon. And you start feeling like, wow, there's so much I can do, and I can do all these different things. But if that person, that was really excited about mastering these three chords and a few strumming patterns, and while there's so much excitement about that in the beginning, if they basically, that's like the same thing, they're the same way they're playing a guitar 20, 30, 40 years later, it's going to lose kind of its thrill, right? So what do? We expand. We say, okay, well, I'm going to learn different chords. I'm going to learn minor chords. I'm going to learn bar chords. I'm going to learn some finger picking. And we expand, the way we are interacting with this instrument. And so the same thing happens. It's like we're creatures of habit. It's like we are destined to the sexual script, which is I kiss you this way, you kiss me that way, I do this act, you do that act, we do this position, that position. And every couple left to their own devices generally goes into this, and they might have two or three sexual scripts, DCG, and they just do them on repeat. So part of keeping it hot and part of hot and modern monogamy is a level of exploration to say, how do we bring in novelty in a way that is both of our agreements, that works for both of us, that, is something we're talking about in advance and is safe for both people and is not pushing an edge beyond what feels good to both people, but still allows for some level of novelty and excitement to just get people out of the C, the D, and the G.
Yeah, I love that. So this is going back a little bit more to exploring intimacy and not just having to jump right into the act of like penetrative sex. But you talk a lot about in your book the experience of practicing mindfulness during sex and intimacy. Can you explain that and then share a little bit of your experience with that?
Yeah, I mean, you already kind of set us up well for this answer with what you were saying about just kind of going through it the day and experiencing pleasure and other things. So, pleasure is that the practice of pleasure is directly connected to the practice being present. And so, if I'm, the easy answer example for people to understand is food, right? So, if we're sitting down and let's say we're driving and eating, and we're rushed to our meeting and there's traffic and there's stoplights and we're just trying to eat as fast as we can. And like all of a sudden the food's gone and we're on with our day, oftentimes people, that's like the example of like, I don't even remember eating. Like, it's like,
Yeah.
people like, sit down and do this. They look at their plate and I've done it. I get this. And it's like, where'd my food go? Right. It's not mindful eating. And so there's not like the pleasure in that. That's not a pleasure filled experience. But and so sex is the same way. Like it is literally impossible to have an orgasm. In fact, a great way for a man to last longer, and a technique that a lot of men have taught me when I've interviewed them, that last a long time, is to change the focus. So it's like, okay, like, you're so hot, you're so hot, you're so hot, and like getting closer. And then you change the focus to something that is like, I'm going to stare at that picture over there for a second and like break state. Right.
Yeah.
And so that's like one thing that can help a man last longer, right? Because the practice of pleasure is connected to the practice of presence. So we go outside, the present moment, and all of a sudden the pleasure drops, and men can sustain longer. And so the idea with sex is like, if the mind is constantly wandering to the list, to the jobs, like, sometimes when I've done live events and I ask, people to, raise their hand or type in the chat if they've ever thought about the grocery list during sex, and like the large amount of people, right? It is. And it's like, and so it's important to like realize that this is normal,
Yeah.
right? And that the whole practice of this is just like meditation. It's like people, when I've like taught, I actually have a certificate in meditation. I've meditated for many, many, many years. And when people will say to me when I've taught meditation things like, "Well, I can't meditate," and it's like, "Well, why?" And they'll say like, "Well, because my mind wanders." And then the question is like, "Do you notice your mind wandering?" And they're like, "Yeah." And if you're noticing your mind wandering, you're actually meditating, because the practice is noticing. And even if it takes you 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, I'm like, "Oh, wow, my mind's wandering. Okay, back to my breath." And the same thing's true with sex. It's like, oh, it's like, okay, it's just a practice of presence. It's a mindfulness activity. So the mind wanders and it's thinking about the list. Okay, I'm going to actively notice that. As soon as I notice it, I'm going to come back and just feel my partner's touch. And the more we do that, the more we actually are attuned to our body, and the faster we get back and the less, our mind wanders. But it's in my mind, it's like the best mindfulness based activity, because you can't enjoy pleasure. You can't enjoy that meal, that chocolate cake, sex, any of it if you're not present.
Hmm. I have such a random question, but I've
Okay.
always thought about this when we're talking about presence because again, I deeply study and resonate being in the present moment and mindfulness and all of this stuff. So when we are having sex and or masturbating and we are fantasizing or like thinking back to a really hot like sex encounter that you had or you're fantasizing something else when you're experiencing that pleasure, to me I'm like, is this bad because I'm not in the present moment anymore technically because I'm back in my mind and I'm thinking about that thing or that encounter. So what are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts is it's not totally black and white. There's
Yeah.
definitely moments where we're making love. And if like we're making love and all of a sudden a flashback is going like all of a sudden to with our current partner to another time, it's like,
Yeah.
oh, that was beautiful. Like that can actually be like, we're still kind of in the moment with that person. right? So
Mm.
that's very, very different than being like, I'm thinking about the grocery list. And this is my opinion, right? It's not like there's a scientific rule on what's right or wrong. So I just want to name that this is like my opinion around like some of how I base my opinion on this is this making the moment and my connection with my partner? Is it bringing my heart? Is it bringing my connection deeper with my partner, or is it actually taking me out of the present moment?
Mm.
And that I like that to me is one of like the biggest distinctions. And it's like, oh, a flash of like a memory of like this other moment with my partner comes in my mind while we're making love. And it's like, oh man, like he's so sexy and like all these things. And it's making me like want him even more, right? That's beautiful in my mind. But if it's like one of those things where it's like now I'm out in la la land and I'm disconnected from him, that to me is a different thing. So, I think we all have to come up with like our own value system here and like what is important to us. But from my value system and like what I really like to teach is that like any of this, because my work is really how can we be closer together? How can we grow closer in our love, our intimacy, and all of that? And if I'm checking out and being like, okay, well, I'm not even present, I'm not even like focused on him, then that to me is like a disconnect versus if it's bringing us closer, then it's like, oh, that's actually the connection.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I have a quote from the book that really again just ties back into that intimacy and exploring other ways to be intimate besides just again I guess the penetrative sex. So
Yeah.
page 44, if anyone has the book or is getting the book, this is very interesting information to me because there's a belief oftentimes that foreplay is more important to females, while females do need more time for arousal, as we talked about. Most men get the oxytocin released during this foreplay stage. Therefore, the use of this chemical for health and stress reduction is obtained more during foreplay than orgasm for men. Foreplay is something that is great for both women and men. So interesting. I had never heard that before. I have heard some fun facts about like, yeah, chemicals being released at different times for men and women, but that men have more oxytocin released during foreplay. So do women have more oxytocin released during the orgasm, like we talked about before? So it's
Correct.
at
Yep.
different times.
Yep. Yeah. Men actually during orgasm, they have a lot more of a chemical vasopressin release. Vasopressin also releases for men when they do like they conquer things together. So like that's like thought to be one of the things in like team sports for men, like the bonding might be also like a vasopressin bond, but they do get some oxytocin, but they have a huge amount of vasopressin released at orgasm.
Huh.
Yeah, and the other thing that's so interesting about foreplay that you probably saw in there is that with like what you said where it's like thought that women want it longer, that's also a myth according to surveys. Like when surveys are done around for men and women around how much they like how long they actually want foreplay, it's about 17 to 19 minutes for both genders. So we're actually more overlap there than we think, but I think this is another example of like I think there's a lot of assumptions that we make because of movies and these sorts of things around like, oh, we got to move it along quicker, got to move it along quicker. And I think sometimes, and I've seen this in my own life, like historically before I know what I know now, of like feeling like I should rush it because we got to get to the big act and he's probably not that interested. And every person's different, right? And so this is not going to speak to every person, but in at least the research on this, men most typically want a very sim they also love this part of it. And it might be the oxytocin and the bonding component as a reason for it.
Hmm. So interesting. Yeah, and I definitely have met both sides of the coin of
Yeah.
people that have really enjoyed and really enjoy the foreplay stage, and then men who seem to, yeah, just want the 5 minutes of it and
Right,
be done.
exactly. And women too, right? And so
Yeah.
all of this is like, all of these are commonalities and generalizations that I use for teaching purpose. But the most important thing, and if people are going to get one thing out of this, this interview and one thing out of my book, I think the most important thing really is your relationship is unique, and like talking to your partner about sex and about foreplay and about your rules of, fantasy and flirting and whatever it is, like all your needs, wants, preferences and desires are unique. So I tell you averages just to give you a sense, but in like the actuality, this is why that communication is so important, because we can have averages all we want, and nobody's going to fall in the average with all the things. And and also, just to name real fast, just because I don't want to piss off your audience, when I talk about the faking it thing, I do want to name that I'm not saying that to like make anybody feel bad. Like
Yeah.
I'm not saying that every person has ever done this by any means. All I'm saying when I bring that up is just trying to bring awareness to help both men and women understand like how much benefit it is to put this time in, and how much it benefits the woman, and how much of the time she will actually come back and be more interested in sex and more interested in intimacy, which benefits both people. But if this is something that has happened to anybody, if you've ever faked it, if somebody has ever faked it for you, I do not want anybody to feel any shame around this,
Yeah.
because it is not anybody doing anything wrong. Like, it is simply that we are not talking about this. And so people don't know. So I just want to come back to that too, to say, like, whatever we're saying here, another message is like, please don't feel shame about anything around this. Like, the biggest thing is like, hey, get the knowledge and learn how to improve and grow and have better sex and be more communicative with your partner, be better lovers. But just know that wherever you were working with the knowledge you have. And sadly, this is just not a common place to talk about. So how does anybody know that it's supposed to be any different?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's really, I think that's the huge invitation here. One of the things that has been the most beneficial for me, and that's just, again, like my opinion, my experience is sharing that, like, because I have been met in the past of like, oh, like all of the people that I've been with in the past, like they've come this way or they've come in this amount of time. And I talked about this on the last podcast that I had with a sex therapist. I touched on it, but of course that first of all creates a lot of shame in yourself. So that's hard, but that's somebody else saying it to you. You don't have control of that. What you do have control of, and what's really supported me in this whole process, is saying, okay, well, that's them. Like that, it doesn't even matter. Those are the past people that you've been with. Everyone is different, just like everyone has different hair and everyone has a different body type. Like I just don't, whatever, like I don't finish that way, I don't enjoy it that way, or whatever it is, like that's just not me. And now our invitation is to learn each other, not necessarily like, okay, cool that we all have this past experience that we come in with, which is awesome. But that's been really supportive for me in kind of breaking that shame or that judgment. And yeah, I mean, exactly with the faking it, like you don't know what you don't know. And that's why I love having these conversations, because again, in my past too, and I think we kind of have a similar, because you were raised Catholic, right?
I was. Yep.
Yeah, okay, so we have a little bit of a similar background where I grew up around a lot of Catholicism, and like same thing, like it's just not talked about.
Yeah.
It's shamed, and the answer is just not to have sex at all, and instead of like talking about it. And so that's definitely why I love having these conversations, is to, again, like you said, not share these norms, and have the expectation of like, okay, it's been past 19 minutes, I have to like get off this foreplay. Like it's not these parameters, it's just sharing kind of what the research has shown, and then you have the opportunity to explore what feels good to you and what feels good within your partnership and your relationship. So thank you for all of
Exactly.
that reiteration.
Very,
um
very well said.
Oh, yeah. No, I think it's really important. It's important to like reiterate and then reiterate again.
It is. It is. It's
Um,
true.
so I have a last question, but before I have the last question, Of course, please share where people can connect with you, where people can get your book. At the time this comes out, your book has already been released, I'm anticipating.
Yes.
So, actually, okay, so you're listening to it. Her book's already come out. So where can we get your book? And honestly, it was a very fun read for me. I actually, despite all of the conversations I have about sex, I don't read books about sex often. So it's not like I have, like this entire pedigree, but it was really fun and easy and lighthearted and like a lot of fun invitations. So highly recommend reading the book. But where can listeners also connect with you and find your other fun content?
Thank you, Hannah. And thank you so much for the endorsement. I really appreciate it. It was really my goal. And that is continually my goal is like having these conversations without shame, right? And bringing pleasure in with joy and with ease and working together, getting back on the same team. So if you go to wanttowantIt.com, that is where you can find my book. And it is on Amazon, but wanttowantIt.com is where you'll find all the information and the goodies about it. And then I mentioned the vibrator about orgasms, about orgasm tracking. That's called the Lioness. And I mentioned my yes no maybe checklist. I have other free giveaways. Like in the book, I talk a lot about hormones, for example. And so I have a free libido quiz where people can take this quiz and get a sense of the root causes of their low libido, as well as action steps. Like in my book and all my work, I'm very into action steps because nothing changes without action.
Yeah.
So the easiest place, I have like, information on products I recommend, plus a ton of free downloadable content for people. And so you can find that at havehotsex.com. So two easy URLs to remember, wanttowantIt.com and havehotsex.com.
Love it. Love it. And all of those links will, of course, be in the bottom description below as well. So, last question. You and I were talking. You've been on kind of this PR trip the past couple weeks or months, and obviously talking about your book that is now released and having a lot of fun conversations. So, I'm curious if you can, and take your time kind of reflecting, but is there one question or one topic that you wish that some of these podcast guests would have, or podcast hosts would have asked you, and coming kind of towards the end of your trip? What's one thing that you're like, man, I wish somebody asked me this. That would have been
Mhm.
fun to talk about.
That is such a great question. Um, I think in my mind the question is like, okay, how personal? Because like there's definitely topics I'm like, that'd be personal to like fun to talk about, but I also have agreements with my partner about what I say about our personal life.
Yeah.
So maybe I'll leave that out. Um, one of the things that I think is would be a really cool question of like of any novel thing out there, what is my personal favorite?
Mm,
And surprisingly, nobody has asked me that. And like that is a little bit personal, but it doesn't go too personal. So
mm,
I can answer that. And that is this crazy device. This is, I think, the most genius thing on the market. I'm going to show you guys. So
mm.
this is called the Luxus. I also have it on the Have Hot Sex website, and I have coupon codes for a lot of these things I talk about. But what it is, it's this tiny little, you can see how slim it is. This part
Yeah.
goes on the clitoris, and this is like a harness. So there's one for each side. So it goes on the legs. And so this is a vibrator, and you can see how it's like curved right here. So it like matches the body. But
Yeah.
then men wear this cock ring. And
Yeah.
this cock ring has a magnet in it. So she is a vibrator. It works in like every position, which is super hard. Because oftentimes, if you're bringing a sex toy and it's like, how do you hold it? And how do you do this? And how do you navigate it? This stays where you want. And because it's so sleek and because it matches her own body's pelvis, he can lay on her and she can move into any position and it's comfortable. And this thing that's a cock ring, not only does it make him harder, last longer, all of that, it has a magnet in it and the magnet connects to her part. And when he moves closer to her, and he goes faster, it actually makes this vibrate more. So he has a way with his thrusting that he can actually control a different level of pleasure. So it's just like he gets to stay in this immense amount of control.
Mm.
Now she gets all of this extra excitement. Now they're still having penetrative sex, but she gets all of these 8,000 nerve endings starting to wake up that take on the clitoris. And then they can do all of these other positions. It eliminates so many things, like bringing in the clitoris, the orgasm gap, where it's like, how do we get closer to climaxing in the more similar time? Positions that work with this. It is just, I just think this is the most genius toy ever. The company took almost 10 years to develop this. They did so many trials to get it right. And I just think it's the best novelty toy ever. I'm a huge fan. But
I that sounds so fun. I mean, yeah, it sounds like it would eliminate so many complications of like trying to hold like a finger vibrator or something when you're having
exactly.
sex, or like even like well, I think I can share this. This is okay. It's a past partner. Like a cock ring that like has the vibrator on it, but then it's like sometimes you're just not getting stimulated. Sometimes like it's too much for them. Yeah, it sounds super
Exactly.
interesting.
Because they're not getting vibrated much with that. Because that is the problem. Oftentimes,
Ah,
like men don't always like that vibration, but they
yep.
get to have the cock ring and vibrate you. But since it's just a magnet on theirs, they might feel like the tiniest little vibration when they get close to you, but it's extremely minimal.
Yeah.
And so they're not getting all the vibration, on their penis, which, if you want that, you can go and get a toy for that, of course.
Yeah.
But a lot of men I find that are like way less interested in that. And so that's a way that it can work for both people.
Mm, mm. Thank you for sharing that, and then sharing also, of course, in the beginning, the app and tracking all of that. And of course, I'll link that below. And I'm sure you said it's on your website too,
Yeah.
but it's so interesting too. I mean, I feel like we could have a whole nother podcast just talking about toys or novelty items, like you said,
Oh,
because
let's do it.
we should, because I was in New York last weekend and I went to the Museum of Sex, and it's actually a very, very cool museum, and it's not all about sex toys, but of course in the beginning their gift room is like all of these sex toys, and some of them, I mean some of them, most of them are just the boring ones, but some of them I'm like, oh, I didn't even know there was like a sex toy like that. So again, one of those things that we just don't talk about and we don't explore. And even like, I mean, I've been on like Adam and Eve or like those sex toys things, and like I've never seen anything like that. Not that I've done a ton of research, but how do you find these things? Yeah, maybe we should have another
Yeah,
maybe
let's
we
do
should have
it. I'll
another
bring out all my toys.
conversation. Yeah, that would be really fun, I think,
It
because
would be.
it's again, and also kind of breaking down those barriers of shame and guilt around using a toy. I think that's a whole nother conversation. So
Exactly.
um,
Exactly.
well, we'll leave that as a little teaser, TBD, to TBC, to be continued. I don't know what that acronym is. Yeah, more to come. I think that would be really cool to talk about. But thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This is a really fun conversation. Thank you for all of the beautiful work that you're doing in this world and to improve relationships. And you're just such a fun and easy person to talk to too. So I really appreciate you.
Oh, same, Hannah. Thank you. Thank you for the vulnerability of this topic and having me. And thank you, everybody, for listening with such open hearts. I appreciate you all.